They thought they were arresting a suspect. They didn't know they were arresting the law itself, and the law always wins. The city lights smeared into long watercolor strokes as I drove home, the low hum of the engine a welcome reprieve from the day's relentless noise. It had been a grueling cross-examination, one of those days that leaves you feeling like you've run a marathon in your mind. The weight of my leather briefcase on the passenger seat was a familiar comfort, a tangible reminder of the order and logic I fought for every single day. The law was my sanctuary, a complex but ultimately fair system of rules and consequences. At least that's what I told myself. I was 3 blocks from my apartment, mentally scrolling through takeout options, when the world behind me erupted in a kaleidoscope of red and blue. The flashing lights filled my rearview mirror, sharp and insistent, cutting through the peaceful night. I felt a familiar weary sigh build in my chest. A broken taillight? Was I drifting over the line? I was certain I hadn't been speeding. I signaled, pulled over to the curb beneath a flickering street lamp, and cut the engine. I rolled my window down halfway, placed my hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, and waited. Standard procedure. Keep it simple. Keep it calm. 2 officers approached. One on my side, one on the passenger side, their flashlights cutting sharp beams into the darkness of my car. The one at my window was young, with a jaw that seemed permanently clenched and an air of restless energy. His older partner hung back slightly, observing with a placid, unreadable expression. "Evening, ma'am," the young one said, his voice clipped. He shined the light directly into my eyes, forcing me to squint. "License and registration." "Of course, officer. Is there a problem?" I asked, my voice even. I reached slowly, deliberately, for the glove compartment, narrating my actions. "I'm just reaching for my registration." "Es." He didn't answer my question. He just watched my every move, his hand resting on the butt of his holstered weapon. I handed him the documents along with my driver's license from my wallet. He took them, his eyes scanning my face, then the license, then back to my face, as if trying to solve a puzzle. "Maya Johnson," he read aloud, a slight inflection on my name that I couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't just reading, it was an assessment. "Where are you coming from tonight, Miss Johnson?" "From my office," I said simply. "I'm on my way home." "Bit of a late night at the office, huh?" he pressed, his flashlight beam now tracing the interior of my car, lingering on my briefcase. "It was a long day." He exchanged a look with his partner. It was a fleeting glance, but it was packed with meaning I was on the outside of. A silent, ugly agreement. My stomach tightened. I'd felt this atmosphere before. The air growing thick with suspicion that had no basis, in fact, only in perception. The presumption of guilt that settled over you like a shroud. "We got a report," the young officer, Davies, according to his name tag said, turning his attention back to me. "A vehicle matching this description was involved in an armed robbery about an hour ago over on West Elm." My mind, the prosecutor's mind, kicked in immediately. Matching description. My car was a 5-year-old, dark gray sedan. There were probably 10,000 of them in this city. It was the flimsiest of pretexts. A robbery? "I can assure you, officer, I've been at my desk for the last 6 hours. I have time-stamped emails and building security logs to prove it." The corner of his mouth twitched. He saw my calm, factual response not as cooperation, but as a challenge. "Is that so? Well, we're still going to need you to step out of the vehicle, ma'am." My training, every instinct I had as an officer of the court, screamed. "On what grounds?" I asked, my voice still level, but with a new edge of steel. "You have my license, my registration is clean, and a vague vehicle description doesn't constitute probable cause for a search or for me to exit my vehicle." That was a mistake. I knew it the second the words left my mouth. To him, I wasn't a citizen asserting her constitutional rights. I was a suspect talking back. Officer Davies's eyes narrowed. "Step out of the car. Now." Before I could protest further, my car door was yanked open. A jolt of white-hot indignation shot through me. He reached in, his grip strong and unyielding on my arm, and pulled me out onto the sidewalk. I stumbled, catching my balance as his partner moved in. "You're making a serious mistake," I said, my voice low and shaking with a fury I was struggling to contain. "The only one making a mistake here is you," Davies snarled, twisting my arm behind my back. The cold metal bit into my wrists as the handcuffs clicked shut. The sound was deafening in the quiet night. They hadn't read me my rights. They hadn't told me what I was being arrested for. Every violation was a tick mark in my mental ledger, a new line item in the complaint I was already drafting against them. They had no idea. They had just arrested a senior prosecutor for the state attorney's office. As the older officer pushed me towards the back of the patrol car, Davies turned back to my sedan, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. "Let's see what she's hiding in that fancy briefcase." He popped the passenger door open and reached across the seat, his fingers closing around the worn leather handle. He pulled it out and set it on the hood of my car with a thud, flipping the brass latches open. He started rifling through my legal pads and case files, a smug smirk playing on his lips, certain he was about to find something incriminating. Then he pulled out my wallet, the one I kept my official identification in. He flipped it open. He froze, his smug smirk melting into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. He looked from the small plastic card in his hand, back to me in the darkness of the patrol car, and his mouth opened, but no words came out. The older officer, the quiet one, noticed the sudden change in his partner's demeanor. He walked over from the passenger side of my car, his expression one of weary curiosity. "What is it, Davies?" he asked, peering over his partner's shoulder. And then he saw it. He saw my face on the laminated card, my name, and beneath it the words that had just detonated their entire evening. Senior Prosecuting Attorney, State of Illinois. The silence that followed was heavy and profound. The street lamp above seemed to buzz louder. The distant city hum faded into nothing. The older officer, Riley, snatched the ID from Davies's numb fingers. He stared at it, then at me, my face illuminated by the flashing lights painting the interior of the squad car. The recognition in his eyes was instant, but unlike Davies's sheer panic, Riley's expression was one of dawning horror, the look of a man watching a train wreck unfold in slow motion, knowing he's strapped to the engine. Davies finally found his voice, a strangled, pathetic sound. "Ma'am, there's been a misunderstanding." I just stared back at him through the cage, my expression unreadable. I let his words hang in the air, hollow and useless. A misunderstanding? Was that what he called assaulting a citizen, illegally searching their vehicle, and cuffing them without cause? A misunderstanding, I repeated, my voice devoid of all warmth. It was the voice I used in the courtroom when a witness was lying, a flat surgical instrument designed to peel back layers of deception. "Officer Davies, is that the term you'll be using in your official report?" He flinched as if I'd struck him. Officer Riley moved with a sudden urgency, fumbling for his keys. Let's just calm down," he said, his voice placating as he unlocked the patrol car door. "Get her out of the cuffs, Davies." Davies seemed paralyzed, still staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. Riley pushed him aside with an exasperated grunt and reached in himself. "My apologies, Miss Johnson. Deepest apologies." The handcuffs fell away from my wrists with a metallic clatter. I rubbed the raw, red marks they'd left behind, the sting a physical reminder of the lines that had been crossed. I stepped out of the car, smoothing my jacket, and stood before them. The power dynamic had shifted so completely it was almost a physical force in the air. A moment ago, I was a suspect, a problem to be managed. Now, I was their reckoning. "This traffic stop is not over," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. "Officer Davies, Officer Riley, give me your badge numbers." Riley recited his immediately, his eyes downcast. Davies stammered, his gaze darting around as if looking for an escape route. Your badge number." "Now," I commanded, my voice cutting through his panic. He finally managed to choke it out. I committed them both to memory. "You'll be hearing from my office, from internal affairs, from every oversight body I can think of." "Ma'am, please," Davies begged, the arrogant swagger he'd worn just minutes ago completely gone, replaced by the desperation of a man who could see his career, his pension, his entire future circling the drain. It was a mistake. The car matched the description, that's all. We were just doing our job. Your job? I took a step closer. My eyes locked on his. Your job is to uphold the law, not to use it as a weapon against the very people you're sworn to protect. You did not have probable cause for a stop, let alone a search and an arrest. You violated my Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights, not to mention half a dozen departmental protocols. You didn't do your job, Officer Davies. You committed a crime. Riley looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. He knew I was right. He knew every word I said would be Exhibit A in the case against them. Now, I continued, turning my attention to Riley, the slightly more sensible of the two, get on your radio. I want your supervising officer on scene, immediately. Riley's face paled further. This was the point of no return. A quiet, off-the-books apology was one thing. Involving a sergeant made it official. It put everything on the record. But he knew he had no choice. He walked back to the patrol car, his shoulders slumped in defeat, and picked up the radio. I could hear his strained voice calling for a supervisor, the dispatcher's crackling response echoing in the night. We waited in a tense, unbearable silence. Davies wouldn't look at me. He just stared at the open briefcase on the hood of my car, at the case files he'd so carelessly manhandled, as if he could will the last 10 minutes out of existence. I stood my ground, a silent, immovable object of their own creation. After what felt like an eternity, a third set of headlights turned the corner, approaching slowly before pulling up behind their cruiser. The door opened and a large, broad-shouldered sergeant stepped out, his expression stern. He looked at his two officers standing there like guilty schoolboys, at me, and at my open briefcase. "Riley, what in the hell is going on here?" he boomed, his voice gravelly with authority. Officer Riley started to explain, stammering about a mistaken robbery call, but the sergeant waved him into silence. He walked towards me, his eyes taking in my suit, my demeanor, and the fury simmering just beneath the surface. He looked me up and down, a flicker of something I couldn't place crossing his features. Then his eyes widened slightly, not in panic like Davies', but in a grudging, almost bitter recognition. A slow, cynical smile spread across his face. "Well, I'll be," he said, the words dripping with a familiar contempt I knew all too well. "Look who it is, Counselor Johnson. Fancy meeting you out here. Let me guess. You finally pissed off the wrong judge?" The sergeant's words hung in the air, thick with a history I hadn't anticipated. I recognized him then. Sergeant Miller. We'd crossed paths before, in the sterile, adversarial environment of a courtroom. I'd prosecuted a case a few years back. A brutal assault where the key evidence was mishandled by the responding officers. One of those officers, a rookie at the time, was Miller's protégé. My cross-examination had been relentless, exposing the chain of custody violations that ultimately led to the case being dismissed on a technicality. Miller had been in the gallery that day, his eyes burning holes into the side of my head. He had never forgiven me for, in his eyes, letting a guilty man walk free because I'd done my job too well. "Sergeant Miller," I said, my voice as cold and hard as granite, "your officers just illegally detained and assaulted me. I suggest you choose your next words very carefully." Miller let out a short, humorless laugh. He gestured dismissively at Davies and Riley, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. "Oh, I'm sure my boys got a little overzealous. But you know how it is, Counselor. Tense situations, split-second decisions. You're always so quick to judge from the safety of your mahogany desk." His condescension was a lit match dropped on a puddle of gasoline. My composure, the carefully constructed wall I maintained in my professional life, began to crack. A split-second decision to pull me over without cause, a split-second decision to ignore my rights and cuff me without justification. This wasn't a decision, Sergeant. This was an abuse of power, born from prejudice and incompetence. Prejudice? Miller's cynical smile widened, and he took a step closer. The smell of stale coffee and self-righteousness rolled off him in waves. "Is that the card you're playing tonight, Johnson?" Because last I checked, my officers were responding to a report of a violent felony. They saw a car that fit the description, a lone driver acting suspiciously. "Acting suspiciously?" I cut him off, my voice rising. "By driving the speed limit? By pulling over immediately? By calmly asking why I was being stopped? What exactly about my behavior was suspicious to you, Sergeant? Or was it just my face? The fact that a black woman was driving a decent car in a nice neighborhood after dark? The accusation landed with the force of a physical blow. Davies and Riley shuffled their feet, refusing to meet my eyes. Miller, however, didn't flinch. He just stared at me, his expression hardening. "You prosecutors are all the same," he spat, the veneer of professional courtesy completely gone. "You think you're untouchable. You sit in your ivory towers, making deals with scumbags and putting good cops on trial, but you have no idea what it's like out here. You don't know what we see, what we deal with every single night." "I know what the law is, Sergeant," I countered, stepping forward until we were almost chest to chest. "It's the same law for you, for me, and for the people you just falsely accused. And I know you and your officers broke it tonight. So here's what's going to happen. You are going to take my full and formal complaint, right here, right now. You are going to document every single violation these officers committed, and you are going to hand-deliver that report to the Chief of Police and the District Attorney's office first thing in the morning. Am I making myself clear?" Miller's jaw tightened, a muscle pulsing in his cheek. He was trapped. He hated me, hated everything I stood for, but he was a sergeant. He knew procedure. He knew how badly his men had screwed up, and he knew I held all the cards. Refusing to take my complaint would be career suicide. With a look of pure loathing, he turned to Riley. "Get the tablet. Take the counselor's statement." Riley practically sprinted to the patrol car, eager to put some distance between himself and the escalating conflict. He returned with a departmental tablet, his hands trembling slightly as he handed it to me. I began to speak, my voice clear and steady, dictating every detail of the encounter. I started with the time of the stop, the lack of a stated reason, the illegal search of my vehicle, the assault, the failure to read my Miranda rights. With every word I could feel Miller's animosity growing, a toxic, palpable thing in the cool night air. I was halfway through detailing Officer Davies's unprofessional conduct when Miller's radio crackled to life, the dispatcher's voice sharp and urgent. "All units in Sector 4 be advised. Suspects in the West Elm armed robbery have been apprehended. Repeat, suspects have been apprehended following a vehicle pursuit. 2 male Caucasians driving a stolen blue pickup truck." The silence that followed was absolute. A stolen blue pickup truck, not a dark gray sedan. 2 white men, not a black woman. The flimsy pretext for this entire nightmare had just been publicly, officially, and irrefutably obliterated. I stopped my dictation and slowly raised my head, looking directly at Sergeant Miller. The blood had drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, gray mask of shock. The last shred of his blustering authority had vanished, leaving only the raw, ugly truth of the situation exposed under the harsh streetlights. He had defended his officers, vilified me, and stood on a platform of lies that had just crumbled into dust beneath his feet. I held the tablet out to him. "I believe," I said, my voice dangerously soft, "we need to add a few more things to this report, starting with racial profiling and filing a false police report." Miller stared at the tablet as if it were a venomous snake. He looked at his officers, now utterly defeated, and then back at me. He knew this was no longer about a complaint that might get buried in paperwork. This was now a full-blown scandal, a potential federal case, and I was the prosecutor who would be leading it. He opened his mouth, but for a moment he seemed to be struggling for air. Then he looked past me, his eyes widening slightly, focusing on something down the street. A flicker of something that looked almost like relief. "You know what, counselor," he said, a strange, new edge to his voice. "I think your night is about to get a whole lot more complicated." He pointed behind me. "Because it looks like your client is here." I turned, confused. My client? I didn't have any clients. I was a prosecutor. Down the block, another car had pulled up, a sleek black town car with tinted windows. The back door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my car. As he stepped into the light, my blood ran cold. It was Marcus Thorne, the notorious, untouchable head of the Thorne crime syndicate. a man I had been building a massive RICO case against for the last 18 months. He saw me, and a slow predatory smile spread across his face as he started walking towards us. Marcus Thorne's presence on that street corner was like a lit stick of dynamite. The air crackled, the carefully drawn lines between cop, prosecutor, and criminal blurring into an incomprehensible mess. Miller and his officers looked just as stunned as I felt. Thorne was a ghost, a man who operated through layers of lawyers and proxies, never dirtying his own hands. Seeing him here, in the middle of this disaster, was unthinkable. Counselor Johnson, Thorne's voice was smooth, a low purr that belied the violence simmering beneath his polished exterior. Fancy meeting you here. I heard there was some trouble. My people are always listening. He glanced at the three officers, his smile turning razor sharp. Looks like the city's finest are keeping you busy. Miller found his voice first, his cop instincts overriding his shock. Thorne, what the hell are you doing here? This is an active police scene. Thorne waved a dismissive hand, as if swatting away a fly. Relax, Sergeant. I'm just a concerned citizen, checking on the well-being of our esteemed state attorney. After all, he said, his dark eyes locking onto mine, it would be a tragedy if something were to happen to the woman who's been working so hard to... what's the word? Reorganize my business affairs. The threat was veiled but unmistakable. He was showing me he knew where I was, that he could get to me. He was turning this situation, this gross abuse of police power, into an opportunity to intimidate the prosecutor who was trying to put him away for life. But he had miscalculated. So had Miller. They both saw me as a woman, a target, a piece on their board. They had forgotten who I was. I was a prosecutor. I lived in the gray spaces. I saw the angles, and I knew how to turn an enemy's strength into a weapon against them. I took a deliberate step away from Miller and towards Thorne, a cold, clear plan forming in my mind. Marcus, I said, my voice calm, almost conversational. What perfect timing. I was just discussing another crime with these officers, a conspiracy, in fact. Thorne raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Miller's head snapped towards me, his expression a mixture of fury and confusion. What the hell are you talking about, Johnson? I ignored him, keeping my eyes fixed on the crime boss. You see, Sergeant Miller here was just suggesting that this whole misunderstanding might have been orchestrated, that perhaps someone with a vested interest in disrupting my work might have made a phony robbery call, describing my car, knowing a certain type of officer would take the bait. I let the accusation hang in the air. Someone who wanted to send me a message. Someone who wanted to see me roughed up, humiliated, and maybe even taken off the board for a while. Thorne's smile faltered for the first time. The implication was clear. I was accusing him of setting me up, of conspiring with corrupt cops. It was a lie, a complete fabrication born of the moment, but it was a beautiful, perfect lie. Miller's face turned purple with rage. That's insane. I would never work with this scum, he roared, pointing a trembling finger at Thorne. Wouldn't you? I pressed, turning my icy gaze back to the sergeant. You've made your disdain for me perfectly clear, and you're telling me it's just a coincidence that the most powerful criminal I'm prosecuting shows up at the scene of my false arrest? An arrest your officers initiated based on a phantom tip about a car that didn't match the real suspect's vehicle in any way. Davies and Riley looked like they were about to be physically sick. They had been pawns in Miller's petty revenge fantasy, and now they were being implicated in a conspiracy with a major crime lord. Thorne, for his part, was smart. He saw the trap I was laying. He was being framed, and the only people who could refute it were the three corrupt cops standing right next to him, his word against ours. This is fascinating, Counselor, Thorne said slowly, backing away towards his car. But I think you have this all wrong. I have nothing to do with this local color. He was cutting his losses, getting out before he was pulled any deeper into the muck. He got into his town car, and it sped away into the night, leaving me alone with the wreckage of 3 police careers. The game was over. I had won. Sergeant, I said, my voice dropping back to its professional prosecutorial tone. You and your officers are now persons of interest in a federal investigation into conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Place your sidearms on the hood of the car. You are being detained." Miller looked at me, his face a mask of utter defeat. The fight was gone, replaced by the hollow emptiness of a man who had flown too close to the sun and had his wings melted by a fire of his own making. He slowly, deliberately, unholstered his weapon and placed it on the car. Riley and Davies followed suit, their movements sluggish, defeated. The aftermath was swift. Internal Affairs descended, followed by the FBI. The body cam footage, the dispatcher logs, and my meticulously detailed statement painted an undeniable picture. Davies and Riley were fired and faced charges for assault and unlawful detainment. They sang like canaries, detailing Miller's long-standing grudge against me and his explicit instructions to find something on me if they ever got the chance. Sergeant Miller was indicted on a laundry list of charges, including conspiracy and witness tampering. His career, once a source of arrogant pride, was now a smoldering ruin. As for my case against Marcus Thorne, my little gambit on the street corner had an unexpected side effect. The rumor that he was working with dirty cops, even a false one, spread like wildfire through the underworld. Trust is the currency of organized crime, and Thorne was suddenly bankrupt. His lieutenants, fearing he'd sell them out next, began to talk. One by one they came to my office, ready to make deals, to give up their boss, to save themselves. 6 months later, I stood in a courtroom, not as a victim on the sidewalk, but as the lead prosecutor. I watched as the jury foreman read the verdict, guilty on all counts. Marcus Thorne was sentenced to life without parole. I still drive home late some nights, the city lights still smearing into watercolor strokes. But something is different. That night those officers tried to put me in a box. They saw my skin, my gender, and they made their assumptions. They tried to take my power, my voice, my name. But they failed. They didn't realize they weren't just arresting an innocent woman. They were arresting the law itself. And the law always wins.